My brother changed the locks on my father's house the evening of the day we buried him. I know because I drove back after the reception to collect the cardigan I had left on the hook by the back door. The green one my father always said made me look like someone who had things figured out. I had worn it the morning of the service and taken it off in the heat of the afternoon and hung it on that hook the way I had hung things on that hook 10,000 times before without thinking. My key did not work. I stood on that back step in the particular stillness of a day that has already taken everything it is going to take and tried the key twice more, because that is what you do when something does not work and you cannot yet accept that it has been made not to work. The lock had been changed. Recently. The brass around the cylinder was still bright where the old one had been removed. I drove home. I did not call my brother that night. I did not cry. I sat at my kitchen table with my father's key still in my hand, the one he had pressed into my palm 3 years earlier in his kitchen, the morning after his diagnosis, when he said, "Take this, you are the one I trust with it," and I thought about something I knew that my brother did not know I knew. My name was on the mortgage. His was not. And the bank would be open in the morning. This is that story. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 36 years old, I work as a loan processor at a regional bank, and I had been quietly paying my father's mortgage for 37 months before he died. Not helping with it, not occasionally covering it when things were tight, paying it, in full, every month. From my account to his lender with my name on the payment record, the way my name appears on every document I have ever touched in my professional life. Clearly, correctly, and with the particular care of someone who understands that financial documents outlast the people who sign them. My father's name was Robert. He was 68 years old when he died, and he was the kind of man who fixed things himself rather than calling anyone, who kept the same truck for 19 years because it still ran fine, and who had one phrase he used when he caught you doing something quietly good that no one else had noticed. He would look at you sideways and say, "I see you, kid," not loud, not performed, just that. A father noticing a daughter in the particular way that made you feel seen all the way down. He said it to me the morning he gave me the key. I had just told him I wanted to be added to the mortgage so I could make the payments directly while he focused on his treatment. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he pressed the key into my hand and said it. "I see you, kid." I carried that sentence for 3 years. I am still carrying it. My brother's name is Dumps. Dumps is 4 years older than me and has always operated on the assumption that being older is the same as being more entitled, which is an assumption our family did nothing to correct, while we were growing up and everything to reinforce. Dumps got the car when Dad bought a new one. Dumps got the college fund contribution. Dumps got the benefit of every doubt in every conflict, because he was the firstborn son, and in my father's generation that meant something even when the firstborn son had done nothing particular to earn the distinction. By the time our father was diagnosed, Dumps lived 40 minutes away and visited on Christmas and called on Sundays when he remembered. I lived 12 minutes away and showed up, not because I was keeping score, because my father was sick and the house needed someone and I was the one who could be there. I arranged his medical appointments. I managed his medications. I coordinated with his doctors when he could not follow the conversations himself. I paid his mortgage because 3 months into his treatment, the payments started slipping, and rather than watch a man who had owned his home for 31 years lose it to missed payments, I simply took them over. I did not tell Dumps, not out of strategy, not because I anticipated needing it later. I did not tell him because Dumps would have had opinions about it, and I did not have the energy for Dumps's opinions while I was also managing my father's care. I told my father and my father told his attorney because my father understood that financial arrangements need to be documented, and he was a man who believed in doing things properly. The attorney documented it, the lender documented it, the mortgage servicer had my contact information, my payment history, and my name cross-referenced on the account. The documentation existed whether Dumps knew about it or not. And on the day after my father's funeral, Dumps changed the locks. The morning after I found the changed lock, I called Dumps before I called the bank. I want to be clear about this because it matters to me that I tried the direct conversation first. I am not someone who goes around people when going through them is possible. I called him at 8 in the morning, and I asked him plainly why the lock on Dad's house had been changed. He did not pause. He was not embarrassed. He told me he had moved some of his things in and wanted to make sure the property was secure during the estate process. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed, smoothly, with a particular calm that is not real calm but performed calm, the kind that only works if the other person does not already know what you do not know they know. He told me the house was going to be part of the estate, and that everything would be handled properly, and that I should not worry about it. I asked him if he had spoken to the attorney. He said he would be handling that. I said okay. I thanked him for letting me know. I hung up. I want to tell you about the feeling in my chest in the minutes after that call, because it was not anger exactly. I had expected the lock. I had not been surprised by it. Somewhere in the 3 years of carrying my father's house alone, while my brother arrived at Christmas with wine and opinions, I had understood at some level that this was where the story was going. That when there was nothing left to manage, Dumps would arrive to claim what the management had protected. What I felt was something quieter than anger, more like the specific clarity of a person who has been in water so long she has stopped noticing it is cold and has simply started swimming. I had a job to do, I knew how to do it, and the institution that held all of the relevant documentation was 12 minutes away and had been expecting my call for 37 months. I want to pause here and tell you about what I do for a living, because it is going to matter in a few minutes. I process mortgage loans. I have done it for 9 years. I sit across desks from people at the most financially significant moments of their lives, and I read documents that most people sign without fully understanding, and I make sure that what those documents say is what those people mean. I know what a mortgage is. I know what it means to be on one. I know what rights attach to a name that appears on a loan. And I know, with the particular precision of someone who has explained it to strangers hundreds of times, exactly what happens when someone attempts to take possession of a property on which they hold no financial interest, while someone else holds an active payment obligation. I know this the way Cassidy knew Medicaid math, not as a weapon I had prepared, as a fact I had always carried because carrying facts is simply what I do. The next morning I drove to my branch, not my own branch where I worked, a different one, 3 towns over, the one that serviced my father's mortgage account. I asked to speak with a loan officer. I brought my documentation, the payment records, the correspondence showing my name on the account, the letter my father's attorney had drafted 3 years earlier when we formalized the arrangement, my father's death certificate which I had received the day before. The loan officer's name was David. He was methodical and careful, and he read everything I placed in front of him without rushing. When he was finished, he looked up and said, "You understand that as a party to this mortgage you have legal standing with respect to this property that supersedes a simple change of locks by someone who is not on the loan." I said I understood. He said he would need to initiate a formal process, that there were steps, that nothing happened instantly, that I should contact an attorney if I had not already done so. I had already done so. I had called my father's estate attorney the evening of the changed lock. She had told me the same thing David told me now, but in the particular language of someone who had seen this exact situation before and was not surprised by it. David processed my documentation. He opened a formal inquiry on the account. He noted the death of the primary borrower and the continuity of the payment obligation under my name. He gave me a case number. I drove home. I went to work. I want to tell you about those 2 weeks because they were the hardest part of the whole process, and not for the reasons you might expect. I was not afraid of the outcome. I had the documents. The documents were clear. The bank's interest in the property was straightforward, and my standing in relation to that interest was established and verifiable. I was not worried about losing. What was hard was the silence. Dennis had told our mother that he had moved into the house to look after it during the estate process. Our mother told our aunt. Our aunt told the cousins. The story that circulated in the family during those 2 weeks was that Dennis was being responsible and I was being difficult, that I was making a hard time harder, that this was not the moment to be fighting over property. I heard versions of this story from 4 different relatives in 2 weeks. Each time I said the same thing. I said I was not fighting over property. I said there were documents that needed to be reviewed and that the process was underway. I said nothing more than that. I want to be honest about why I stayed quiet. It was not strategy exactly. It was the particular discipline of someone who works with documents every day and understands that a document does not need a spokesperson. It will say what it says when the right people read it. My job was to make sure the right people were reading it. My job was not to manage the family's opinion of me while that process ran its course. Renee, I had a Renee too, though mine was my father himself in the form of everything he had taught me about doing things properly, had shown me through 30 years of watching him that the person who does the work quietly does not need to announce it. The work announces itself eventually. You just have to stay out of its way long enough to let it. I stayed out of its way. The bank's formal process took 11 days. On the 12th day, Dennis received a letter. I know what was in the letter because the attorney explained it to me afterward. The letter informed Dennis that the property at my father's address was subject to an active mortgage obligation, that a party other than the deceased borrower had been identified as a co-obligor on the account with a documented payment history of 37 consecutive months, that any change to the occupancy or security of the property made without the knowledge and consent of all parties to the mortgage was potentially in conflict with the terms of the loan agreement, that the lender required clarification of the current occupancy situation and the intended disposition of the property before any estate proceedings affecting the property could be finalized without lender involvement. It did not say he had to leave. It did not say I had won anything. It said the bank had a different understanding of the situation than the one Dennis had been operating from. And it said that understanding had my name in it. Dennis called me the afternoon he received the letter. The performed calm was gone. He wanted to know what I had done. I told him I had not done anything except notify the mortgage servicer of our father's death and provide documentation of my payment history as required. He said I was being vindictive. He said this was not what Dad would have wanted. He said I was making everything harder than it needed to be. I let him talk. I had learned from my father that you let a man finish his sentences before you answer them. When Dennis was finished, I asked him one question. I said, "Dennis, did you know my name was on the mortgage?" There was a silence on the line. I said, "I have been paying Dad's mortgage for 37 months. My name has been on this account since month 1. The bank has 37 payment records with my name on them. Did you know that before you changed the locks?" Another silence. He said he had not known. I said, "I know you didn't. That is the only reason we are having this conversation instead of a different one." We did not speak again for 3 weeks. The estate process took 4 months in total. It was not simple and it was not painless, and I will not pretend otherwise. There were conversations with attorneys that went in circles. There were family members who continued to circulate the story about me being difficult even after it became clear that the situation was more complicated than they had been told. There were nights when I sat with my father's key in my hand, the one that still did not work, the one from before the locks were changed, and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been keeping something standing for so long that even the people who benefit from the standing cannot see it. But the documents were patient in the way that documents are patient. They did not require me to be. They simply waited in their folders at the bank and the attorney's office and the county recorder's system with my name on them and the dates beside my name and the 37 consecutive months of payments that told the story I never had to tell out loud. The resolution took the shape that legal resolutions usually take, which is not dramatic and not clean and not the scene you have been picturing in your head. What happened was that the estate attorney, the mortgage servicer, and both of our attorneys sat in a room and reviewed the documentation and arrived at an arrangement that reflected what the documentation said. Dennis did not keep the house outright. The house was sold. The mortgage was satisfied from the proceeds. The remaining equity, the equity that existed in part because 37 months of payments had been made, was distributed according to a negotiated agreement that reflected the documented financial contributions to the property during our father's illness. I did not get everything. I did not expect everything. What I got was an accounting that reflected the truth of what had happened, a distribution that acknowledged that the house had been kept standing by someone and that the someone had a name and the name was mine. Dennis moved out. He told the family I had forced him out. Some of them believed him. Some of them had already started to revise their understanding of the situation. One cousin called me and said she had not known about the mortgage payments and that she was sorry for what she had said in those first 2 weeks. I told her I appreciated that. I meant it. My mother called me after the settlement. She was not angry exactly. She was the particular kind of sad that comes from watching a version of events you preferred turn out not to be true. She did not apologize. She said she hoped Dennis and I could find our way back to each other eventually. I said I hoped so too. I meant that too, in the complicated way you mean things about people who have hurt you and whom you will always share a father with. I go back to the house sometimes. Not to the inside, it belongs to a young family now, a couple with 2 small children who have already changed the garden and repainted the front door a colour my father would have considered impractical. I drive past it occasionally on the way to somewhere else. I do not stop. I do not need to. What I carry from that house is not the house. It is the key. The one my father pressed into my hand 3 years before he died, and the one that stopped working the evening we buried him. I keep it on my keychain still, not as a monument, not as evidence. Just as the one physical thing that connects me to the morning, my father looked at me sideways after I told him I wanted to take over his payments, and said the thing he said when he caught you doing something quietly good that no one else had noticed. I see you, kid. I see you. There are 4 things I want to leave you with from this story. The first is about documentation as an act of love. I kept meticulous records of my father's mortgage payments because I work with financial documents every day, and I do not know how to do things any other way. But I also kept them because my father asked me to, because he was a man who understood that arrangements made in good faith need to be written down so that the good faith survives the people who made it. The records I kept were not preparation for a fight. They were respect for my father's trust. The fact that they became my protection was a consequence of his wisdom and my willingness to follow it. Document the things that matter not because you distrust the people around you, but because documents outlast people and the truth they contain should outlast too. The second is about silence as discipline. There were 2 weeks during which my family circulated a story about me that was not true, and I did not correct it publicly. Every instinct I had told me to defend myself. My training told me to let the documents do it. The documents were better at it than I would have been. They did not get emotional. They did not get loud. They did not need to explain themselves to anyone. They simply existed with my name on them and the dates beside my name, and let the institution that held them do the work of presenting them at the right moment. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the most disciplined thing available to you. The third is about what it means to keep something standing in the dark. For 37 months I paid a mortgage that no one in my family knew I was paying. I made no announcement. I expected no acknowledgement. I did it because my father needed it done and I was the one who could do it, and there was no more complicated reason than that. The people who do the quiet work rarely receive credit for it while the work is happening, but the work creates a record. And the record has a date on it, and the date is patient. Do the quiet work anyway, do it because it needs doing, and trust that the record of it will speak when the moment comes for it to speak. And the fourth is about what my father gave me that my brother never understood had value. Dennis arrived at the funeral with grief and confidence, and an assumption that entitlement was a form of inheritance. What my father had actually left me was 37 months of trusted with his most important thing. The key he pressed into my hand, the words he said when he gave it to me. The particular education of being the person someone trusts with their home when they no longer have the energy to protect it themselves. My brother inherited an assumption, I inherited a practice. And when the institution that held the documentation was asked to weigh those 2 things against each other, there was only one direction the scale could go. If you are watching this, and you are the one in your family who keeps things running quietly while others take credit loudly, if you are the one whose name is on the documents no one else bothered to read, I want you to hear this. Keep the records, do the work. Trust that documentation is patient in the way that people cannot always afford to be. The institution that holds your paperwork does not care about the family's preferred story. It cares about what is true and verifiable and dated and signed. And the person who does the work in the dark is always the one whose name appears on the page when someone finally turns the light on. If this story reached you today, please share it with someone who needs it. There is a person in your life right now who is doing the quiet work and receiving none of the recognition, and who needs to be reminded that the record of that work exists somewhere with their name on it, and a date beside their name, and that no amount of changed locks can change what the documents already say. Subscribe to True Life Tailies so you never miss a story like this one. New videos every week about people who were quietly loyal, consistently overlooked, and ultimately shown to have been the one holding everything together all along. Leave me a comment, Have you ever been the one in your family who kept things running while others took the credit? Have you ever had documentation save you from a story someone else was telling about you? Tell me your story. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.